Hello and welcome to episode 54 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. Apologies for no podcast last week, but unfortunately we were out travelling and didn't get a chance to put the pod together. But we're back this week with a vengeance, and this week we'll be having a look at the terrific first half in particular in the Derby. Bit of key news through the week with the resigning, and then obviously having a look at the big grudge match this week with the Len Hall game coming up. Joining us this week is our usual resident Victorian expert, Seppo. How are you, mate?
Good evening, and glad to be back for another week of football and our team sitting up there undefeated.
Absolutely, and also joining us this week, back from his summer hibernation, is Valkar. How are you, mate? Thanks for coming on board.
Good. Not a problem, as always.
All right, this week we've got, obviously, Fremantle went into the Derby last week, pretty warm favourites at $1.32, I think it was in the end, and as you said, after the first quarter, they should have been like $1.01, but in the end, they sort of took their foot off the pedal with a 17 goal 9, 111 to 12 goals 9, 81. So a pretty comfortable 30-point win. So if you read the paper in the week, you certainly get some differing views with the media there, Seppo. With I think Justin Chadwick saying Fremantle survived a final quarter pounding from West Coast, but as you said, I mean, if you looked at that first quarter, that was pretty emphatic and certainly probably the best quarter we've played for quite some time.
If anyone think the Eagles actually fought pretty hard, was probably looking at the stats and not actually watching the game to see how it unfolded, because it was probably only small lapses of concentration from the Freo players that they probably just went into the mindset that they were done and dusted and thinking about next week. But certainly, even just some of the goals that the Eagles got to reduce that margin back was, well, two of them were a really odd centre bounce that they didn't recall, that Nataniri got a clear tap out the back that Sandlands didn't even compete for, that resulted in a goal, and another was a silly mistake by, I think it was Mundy or McFarlane on the back line, just kicking it into the man of the mark, which would never usually happen. It just reminds me of the last quarter against Sydney in the prelim last year, where the result was done and the guys just sort of sat back and relaxed. So obviously, won't be a different case this week, but it was just great to sort of put the Eagles away at the end of that first quarter. You know, I did think that the margin would have been a lot closer, well, to how it sort of finished, but when it was sort of way out, I thought these guys were going to put the cue in the rack and just sort of grind out and not put them to the sword like we've never really done. And what prompted me to look after the match is our average winning margin spread over the last couple of years, and 30 points is almost the average under Ross Lyon that we seem to win by. So it's just a magical number that we sort of end up finishing up on no matter who we play.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, you can certainly see both sides of it, of the sort of spectrum with it, in terms of it's probably a little bit disappointing not to see the four-quarter effort, and obviously looking for top two at the end of the year, that percentage could come into play, and we just don't, there was no real reason to take the foot off the pedal there, and, as I said, you can certainly see both sides of the story, but it certainly gave Lions something to work on during the week anyway, that's for sure. What were your thoughts, Valkyrie?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone said the same thing. You don't like to say it, but it definitely looked like we took the foot off the pedal. But at the end of the day, 30-point victory, no injuries, another victory, 3-0. It's a very good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was obviously over in Melbourne during the week, and obviously Dermot Brereton had quite a big story on Lachie Neale there, and he certainly didn't let him down with a terrific performance, winning the Ross Glendinning medal with 42 touches and 8 clearances, I think 3 goals. And, him and Stephen Hill were certainly damaging early in the game, and, just their ball movement was, I think the best way to describe it is what the commentators did. It was quite clinical, and, and it was just amazing how much better we looked with Taberner in the forward line up there as well, just giving us that bit more structure.
And just a lazy three from Taberner, even though Pav had a quiet day by the lofty standards of Pav. But
it's just amazing what someone like Taberner can do to our forward line. The fact that he kicked 3 goals, but for most of the game he didn't seem too influential, but still had a lot to do in terms of when Pav went up the ground, it was still a target there. And what it seems to me the difference from this year is we are keeping that stay-at-home forward for that quick slingshot footy over the back, and there's someone there, as opposed to the last few years when we've sort of gone into the forward line after a quick counter and there's no one there. But I suppose when the guy's running it out of people like Stephen Hill, you don't need guys in the forward line if he's just going to slot them for the centre square, which was just marvellous, just going back over the highlights to see how well Stephen Hill got off the chain was it's a beauty.
I mean, you say Tabner didn't have that much. He didn't look to have that much influence on the game. But I mean, 7 marks, 3 goals, 2. I mean, you'd be very happy to have that week in, week out from your key forward.
A foil for Pav is it's a brilliant job to get 3 goals. It's probably more than everyone would have expected it from him, but he's there doing it, and he's learning the craft, and he's just providing Pav a bit of the chop out. It's going to become more important next week as you start to get more of a backline rather than what the Eagles had out there.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a discussion with one of the guys at work during the week, and just saying, are we going to look at Tabs as the future Pav? And I said, well, from a all around the ground perspective, you're never going to come close. But as a stay-home forward, he has potential. I'm actually really excited about Taberner being in the team.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that Taberner has cemented his spot in the side, and
absolutely.
And they just need to keep working and getting those games into him because he's only going to get better for it. I think the other interesting thing was, as you talked a little bit before, Seppo, about playing that slingshot style. Since Ross Lyon, has come into the club against West Coast, we've managed to always do it pretty well with that slingshot. But it was interesting, even in one passage of play there, where I think they brought the ball through the middle. Taberner actually stayed right back near the goal line, and they just managed to. Once they broke that line, Sutcliffe, I think, just kicked it over the top to Taberner. And it's interesting when you hear a lot of people who watch the game say, well, when they just do that press, why don't you just leave someone right back? And it was one of those times where it all sort of managed to gel, really well. But, it's just one of those games, I think, where everything was clicking for Fremantle. And as you said, even when Nat Nui did manage to win a couple of knockouts, and then we were just managing to shark it. And and he said they just struggled to not only contain our inside, but also the outside, where we had more tackles than they did, even though we were comfortably ahead on the scoreboard. So, yeah, I mean, it was just a terrific performance. And, I think we'll probably need that this week when we get into the Swans, and we'll look at that a little bit more later on. Is there any other?
I want to make a mention to my buddy, Zach Clark. I think he had a big game for him on the weekend.
Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. 15 disposals, 10 marks, 5 of them contested, with 3 of those inside 50s, and 2 goals. I mean, that is close to one of his better games he's played for us. By the way, 100% disposal efficiency too.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you'd be looking for Zach Clark. I mean, obviously,
absolutely.
Most of us last year thought he would be at this. That sort of performance we saw on the weekend would be what we'd see week in, week out. And obviously, having that limited pre-season just makes such a difference. And hopefully, obviously there was a bit of a concern last week, even down at Simmons Stadium when he came off with that knee. But it was just good to see him rebound. And I think it's also good to see those other guys like Chris Mayne getting back to his sort of form that we saw in 2013, and even even in defence, with those guys out, it's interesting. We talked about before with obviously the Eagles losing McKenzie and that, but obviously we haven't had Dawson or Silvani there, and yet our defence still seems pretty seamless. So full credit to those back six as well, and the pressure that the midfield are putting on them as well.
I suppose when you're going over the good performance, some of our guys, like you just mentioned before, Valcom with Zach Clark operating at 100% disposal efficiency. I know it's not a nice stat to look at, but it's great to see some guys like Nick Subin and Luke McFarlane, and even Lockie Neal was operating with his huge amount of 42 disposals at 95%. And it was a good amount of kicking and handballing, so it's not just simple cheap ones. It's guys that have really improved their game, and we seem to be a bit more accurate, getting towards that Hawthorn level of laser kicking and just accurate retention of the footy.
Yeah, I think the other person who's had a really great standout start to the year has been Ibbotson as well. He's just down back and,
How many intercept marks does he take, you reckon? I mean, he had 9 marks for the game. He's probably had 4 or 5 of those at least as intercept marks, which is pretty valuable.
Yeah, no, he's been terrific. And that's the sort of, things that we expect. And the other one who's probably, had another terrific, standout probably from the start has been Daniel Pearce. Obviously, we've been plenty of talk on the boards before the start of the year about whether he was sort of best 22, and obviously, whether he should even be in the side or not. But he's certainly made every poster winner come the first 3 weeks of the season.
10 inside 50s. I mean, he's close to number 1 for inside 50s for the competition.
Yeah, and I think he was that last year. Him and Hill were right up there in the top inside 50s. So
But it makes sense. And your Barlow, your Lockie Neal, your Mundies, your Fife, etc. at the cold hard face of it, and then out to Hill and Pearce.
Yeah,
very clever signing. I'll with hindsight, I'll say it at the time, but I'll say it now. Very clever signing, Daniel Pearce.
Yeah, it was sort of exactly what we were after at the time, and obviously he's been one of those free agency pickups that has actually worked really well.
The only one that's worked for us, isn't it?
Well, we haven't had too many, obviously, yeah. But as I said, I suppose Zach Dawson was close to it, even though he's a rookie pick. But I mean, he was pretty
it's
close.
Not a free agent pick.
So, but yeah, I mean, as you said, I mean, it's hard to take much out of the West Coast game last week. I mean, they are a bit of a rabble, let's be honest, at the moment. So, but as you said, it just shows that sometimes stats aren't a true indication of the game. Like when you look at guys like Maston and Gaff, who got 28 and 27 touches respectively, yet none of them really stood out as being major contributors. Where guys, some of our players who probably had a little bit less probably had more influence with less. So it certainly, as you said, the stats don't always tell a lot, but it does give us a pretty good indicator. Anything else, Seppo, you want to add from the game on the weekend?
Well, I suppose it's just really showing the dominance of our midfield. I know it's been talked about so much, even over here in the east coast of Australia, without talking about how good our midfield is. And I even just saw a poll today that rated Fremantle's midfield better than Sydney's, is the fact that you look at Sandilands without Crowley in there, we've now got a combination of Mundy, Neal and Fife, and maybe Subin or Clancy Pearce if we're going for a bit of a tag. But just looking at the contested possessions from that game, from 16 from Fife, 14 from Neal, and 11 from Mundy, and the way they just bulleted their way out of the midfield, I know it's going to be a different prospect against other sides, but it's just great to see that combination. It's just a perfect balance of size and bodies and their skill sets just to get that ball out there. And I don't know if it's all down to Kirky or just the players that are just showing their talent. It's just a perfect mix, I think. And I think some of it's taken Barlow out there and put him on the half-forward flank. That might just be a good move. I suppose it's set Barlow back a bit on his numbers on last year, but I'd certainly love this combination of Sandilands with Neal at his feet, Fife pulling through, and Mundy just with 2 or 3 people hanging off him, just dishing out the ball.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that we talked about at the start of the year, Seppo, in the pre-season, was the impact that, because we talked a little bit about having Crowley come out of the centre square, where that would actually improve our clearances, because a lot of opposition ruckmen were tapping it towards where Crowley was, and sort of to negate the advantage that we have with Mundy and Fife in there. So, as you said, it's been interesting development. Obviously, it's still only early days, but it'll be interesting to see if that continues throughout the year. And I suppose even more interestingly is if Crowley does get not suspended or does get back in, what the impact or how Ross Lyon will use him going forward if he is able to play.
Or does he even get back in?
Well, that's going to be the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? So it certainly will make it a interesting selection meeting, especially when we've got guys like Crozier, Sheridan, and I mean Mzungu's come back in this week, but we've got plenty of guys in Dawson. Silvani. There's a lot of good players who are sort of knocking the door down to get a game. So it's certainly interesting times if he does get cleared. All right. Obviously, the other big news through the week, guys, was the re-signing of Michael Johnson for 2 years until 2017. A couple of people are a bit iffy about it with his back, obviously, from last year. But, I mean, I think it's a excellent re-signing for us. And, just his ability to set up play down back and direct. His disposal lets him down a little bit at times, but he certainly makes up for it in other ways. And, I mean, I think it's more than a 2-year contract is more than worth, more than adequate for him. And I think it's a good re-signing. What do you guys think?
Oh, definitely. In terms of the skill and what he provides to the team, of a bit of leadership, is fantastic and great to keep him on for a couple of years, especially if we are looking at losing McFarlane at the end of this year. My only concern would have been his back, like the way we saw him play the end of last year, and you wouldn't want that for another 2 years. But from what we've seen so far, he's sort of back to his best. I don't think he's taken the game on and being that sort of adventurous too much. He probably doesn't need to be. He's probably taken more of a key position role with the absence of Silvani and Dawson down there. But I like the way he's playing and certainly can see 2 more years of it because he hasn't lost it yet, providing he's staying fit. So I like the signing, and it's pretty good to get one of many that are out of contract and they're locked away.
Yeah, I'm happy with the signing as well, and be much better when Dawson comes back and he can get to play that floating third man up type role where, as you said, he can get the ball and rebound out a lot more. It's always nice seeing the ball, him with the ball in the hand rather than say Dawson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's another interesting thing when Dawson does come back and is available. Obviously we've got guys down there whose disposal is, most of the guys who are playing down in the back at the moment, their disposal is pretty solid and they're all able to kill. I mean, McFarlane generally plays within his limitations, but when you've got elite users like Ibbetson's been very, very good. Duffield is an elite kick.
When you're looking at Lee Spurrier, you're probably your worst kick in the back six right now.
Yeah. I mean,
and he's not a bad kick.
No, that's right. I mean, obviously, for us now, when you've got Ibbetson, and I mean Johnson, can have his moments, but as you said, when you've got Sutcliffe is also a really good runner and that sort of stuff. It's certainly looking good. And
Sutcliffe's just doing his apprenticeship on the back line until he becomes a midfielder in a couple of years' time. I see him being that same role that they did with Mundy. Plays his bit in the half-back line and then they moves into the midfield and becomes gold class. I see they're doing the same thing with Sutcliffe.
Yeah, and I think that's also probably a bit of a reason with our list. We just really still probably lack that other small defender. I mean, even though he's playing the role really well, but anyone who watched him play when he was a rookie for East Fremantle, just his work along the wing there, he was
streaming down the wing.
Yeah, and he'll, as you said, I think down the track, obviously him and Sheridan will, and I think Sheridan will probably go through that same apprenticeship that Sutcliffe is at the moment, and eventually he'll do that same sort of thing because I think he will be certainly another player who, has started the season well. Unfortunately, he got that calf injury, but he'll be back this week and probably have to work his way back into the side. But I think he'll certainly be another player who'll be down that way. Mm. All right. Also during the week, guys, there was obviously the Fremantle seconds played the East Perth seconds, or Eagles seconds with East Perth, and Fremantle for the first time in a long time had 3 wins on the trot with a 9 goals 16-70 to 7 goals 5-47. And Peel Thunder, once again, were able to get 3 wins in the trot. And once again, we had a number of guys who put in good performances there who were once again pushing for spots. But in particular, Mzungu had 27 touches, Connor Blakely another 23, and Ballard with 29. And obviously, the other one who was a bit of a standout by all accounts was Ed Langdon as well, who played a cracking game by all accounts from down there. I didn't get, fortunately, I was in sort of Melbourne, but all accounts he played a terrific game and looks like another good player coming through for us.
The other one I heard had a good game was Alex Pearce, and looks like he's been rewarded, but we'll get to that a bit later on. But apparently he played really well down the back line as well. So,
and also, Seppo, your man Brady Gray starting to show a little bit as a back pocket player and in defence there, and also the ability to run a bit online, sort of on ball as a tagger. So, depending on what happens down the track, he may get a crack as well.
It almost seems like he's a perfect mould replacement for that small defender we've been looking for, or even Spur. If he keeps on cutting himself open and breaking himself every game, he seems like the perfect replacement, even for just the way he goes about it. I didn't catch the game myself, but just reading the comments on how Brady attacked the football and just, almost playing chicken with the opposition for winning the ball. He goes in really hard and just like the way that it probably doesn't reflect it on these stats, but it just looks like he's starting to develop into that real tough nut and guy that probably we need if he's actually playing down the back pocket for Peel and starts to get used to the Fremantle way. He'll slot into the side and he probably sit there on the emergencies again a couple of times, but if we need to call up on him, I reckon he's ready for it.
Yeah, and I think and that would have been the really pleasing thing, I think, for the Freo match staff is the fact that Alex Pearce and Brady Gray were the two voted best two on the ground, and obviously Mzungu there as well. And we'll have a little bit look at Mzungu's role a bit more, I think, when we get into the preview. But I think it's all good signs for Fremantle, and obviously they've got a much better blend this year with runners and talls. Last year, though, anyone who watched Peel were just they were just way too tall and didn't have the midfield. But with the inclusions of Langdon, Weller, Blakely, those sort of guys, they're obviously looking a lot better and a lot more better sort of mix between talls and smalls, and hence they were able to win a few more games than they did last year. And Ballard, once again, is racking up the ball. He just needs to improve on his disposal a bit. But if he can do that, I think he'll also be a player who could, do something for us in the future. All right. Obviously, the big thing this week, guys. And Seppo, if you want to do the ins and outs this week, we've obviously got Fremantle and Sydney in the annual Len Hall game at Domain Stadium.
Real simple this week. In Mzungu, out Crozier, as omitted. The interesting one for me, though, is the emergencies with Jack Hannah, Tommy Sheridan and Alex Pearce.
Yeah, I mean, we've got sort of one of everything in there with the ruckman, midfielder and defender. And obviously for Sydney, they've brought in Nick Smith, who will obviously probably get the job on Mickey Walters, and Dean Towers has been omitted. So
obviously just a balancing again to get Smith in for the small forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, it would be one of those games. So it'll be interesting to see how they use Rampy and Smith down there, obviously without Valentine in there. So it should be but obviously there's been plenty of talk this week, Seppo, about the game. Obviously Mzungu comes in, and I think he's just going to be that. I think if we were playing someone who wasn't Sydney or, one of the weaker sides, I reckon they may have kept Crozier in there. But I think just with the big body, and particularly the fact that Sydney have got those three big forwards in Tippett, Reid and Franklin, I think Mzungu's ability to cut off traffic, particularly working up and back to ground, I think would have been the main reason.
And not afraid to stand in the way to take a mark.
Absolutely, and he's just got that extra bulk. And even though he's not that tall, I mean, he's only just 6 foot, but he plays taller than that, and he's just that he has that ability to cut off traffic. And I think it's I
was talking about it again as well. I think it's he just offers a bit more flexibility for the Ross Lyon plan. You can go and play back. You can go and run on the wing. You can do stints in midfield, or you can go forward because he's a good overhead mark and pretty solid kick for goal when he gets his opportunity. So I just think he offers more flexibility than Crozier, who's more a high half forward wingman type role. Doesn't really give much flexibility.
And Crozier still hasn't come on with his development in terms of a full body size. He's obviously got a set of skills there, but I think just a bit more time and experience. And
he still looks small, yeah.
Yeah, he has the skills. We've sort of shown his composure is probably starting to build. But until he gets to the side of, I suppose Mzungu is, I'd prefer to take Mzungu into this game. Different opponent against the Eagles. Perfectly see why Crozier gets the game there. But it's quite hard looking at this, who sort of becomes the natural sub, because we're starting to look at just putting the same guys like De Boer and Subin in there that just don't seem like great subs, but it's almost like, well, you're probably in line for all the other guys, probably deserve to start and have a better role to play.
Does Mzungu become the sub, and that way if we're needing an issue down back, he comes in for someone down there, or if we're needing something up forward, he can come in there. He's, like I said, that flexibility, he can come in and play a role.
But that sort of doesn't play into his role, because what Mzungu is really suited for is the run-all-day job. So there'd be a lot of other players that don't really have that impact when they come on, guys that sort of have short stints that can... And it's quite interesting, because I reckon Daniel Pearce as a sub, even though he's had fantastic games so far, could actually work coming on. And just the way he plays...
I still want him to start, though, because
still want him to start, but just as the type of player you want to come on that can have an impact from a couple of disposals. Daniel Pearce, I suppose Walters are type of players that, if Walters is carrying a rolled ankle into this or something like that, or reduced that game time, you'd love them out there for a full game, but probably by nature you probably just say, all right, De Boer and Subin, because they're probably the least... sort of in line for a full game and a start based on performances so far this year. But even then, Subin's had some cracking games so far, and same with De Boer, even from some limited game time himself. So picking a sub's very hard to do out of this list that's out.
I agree.
There.
I mean, you got Clancy Pearce as your other option as well. I mean, similar type role. He's the kind of guy who will go all day, bash and crash.
And Clancy Pearce has almost got that tagging role now. That's the Crowley replacement, just named in a different position. But
he's only tagged 1.5 out of 3 games.
Yeah, I suppose, but he's played on the wing a bit, got some key matchups, like the job he did on Boak was fantastic. And against Sydney, I'm not sure if we're gonna go match up head to head on Kennedy, but there's a lot of players that Clancy Pearce can probably do a job on that you'd probably think they probably can. I think he's been a sub probably 2 or 3 times before for us, but it's just interesting probably looking at all the players on the park there over the past 2 years or however long the sub's been in, and you probably go back to guys like Sutcliffe and Subin that have probably had the vest the most out of all those players out there.
Yeah, I think personally they'll. I think Pearce has to play. I think they'll gave De Boer a run last week, just to give him a full quarter so he didn't have to run laps after the game. But I think they just I think if you look back at that Port game, he just had a real impact when he came on in the last quarter there, and he's just that hard body. I think they have past that, Ross Lyons love to shut down Kieran Jack, and I think Clancy Pearce would probably be a good matchup for him in that regard. And I can't see them they can't afford to take Pearce off, because if they take Pearce off, then they'll just concentrate on shutting down Hill. And you just can't.
I agree. I don't think Seppo's saying that Pearce should be the sub. Just that type of player should be sub, but we don't really have it. We've got the foot soldiers, the Clancy Pearce, the Matt DeBoer, the Mzungu, the Crozier, the Subin, those type of guys. So we don't really. It's hard to put an impact player who are vital to us, like your Sun and your Daniel Pearce, those guys. But it'd be amazing if you could have that type of player as your emergency.
At least we're not in the type of position where you've got a player like Adam Goods as the sub trying to squeeze in. And I'll see he's been left out of the Sydney side to play in the NEFL again. So it's, there's teams that have really good strength across the board are obviously struggling. And this sub rules almost, as it's been discussed on the board, is probably one that will probably change with the implementation of a cap on interchange. So the sub might disappear in another year or two.
Yeah, I think whichever way it goes. I mean, I'd be surprised if it wasn't either the Boer and Mzungu between each other. So whether one starts and one comes in, or the other, and they'll go the other way, depending, unless someone's out there having a shocker or there's an injury. But you'd have to think the remaining guys that are out there are all not going to come off unless there's a particular reason. So you'd have to think
something happens. Yeah.
So you'd have to think, unless Subin stinks it up or something like that, there'd be Subin, De Boer, Mzungu. Those would be the three guys you would have to think. The rest of the players that are out there are all pretty critical to the structure. I mean, even Clancy Pearce to a degree, but he's done his role, and I mean, it'll be just interesting to see which way they go. But you have to think have to be one of those three guys, depending upon which way they want to go in the matchup. So I mean, if you're looking at just the two of them, do you think Luke will go to Buddy Franklin rather than straight up off the bat?
You think McFarlane will be first to go to Buddy?
Yeah.
Well, we've had Johnson. I remember when Franklin was playing for Hawthorn, we've actually had Johnson up on Franklin, especially when it's to go up the ground, because McFarlane seems to stay close to goal. So I think McFarlane might even go to Tippett if he's playing in the square, and let Johnson run up the ground, especially when they used Buddy against us in that final last year going up the ground. It's going to be quite interesting, because Luke almost seems to stop at the 15-metre line once his opponent runs out and lets him take that long kick and not too worry about it, and obviously plays a lot tighter. So it all depends on who's closer to goal, I think, for the Franklin, Tippett, Johnson, McFarlane matchups.
Agreed. Something we probably should mention we haven't is Lachie Neale playing his 50th game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you get that one out there?
Quickly, just like Sutcliffe's last week, I think.
Did you hear there was was one of the interviews? I think I'm pretty certain it was with Sutcliffe, and Sutcliffe was saying that Lachie Neale was saying to him, skip a game, so we can play our 50th together.
But I suppose it's probably not a bad time as well, Seppo, with the just bringing up Lachie Neale with his 50th. We have to probably do a quick shout out to Cassius and Tim for their awesome thread on the Big Footy forums about obviously Lachie Neale as a footballer, but also with the player managers and all that sort of stuff. It's been a terrific read, and strongly suggest anyone who hasn't had a chance to have a read of it probably jump on the forums and have a look, because it's definitely one of the better threads, and probably going to be hard to beat for Post of the Year, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly good. So if you're looking for it, it's the Q&A with Lachie Neale's manager. So Tim Lawrence has kindly arranged with our Cassius to come in there and just really get some good questions answered. And there's a lot of people in our forum that put some good questions rather than the other stuff we've seen in the past where we've tried to get people involved. So it's great to see that on there. And if you haven't already, check it out. It's a good thread. And there's some really interesting stuff in there, not just in relation to Lachie Neale himself, but just football managers in general and what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. The obviously there's been, most of the talk has been on the matchups in the midfield this weekend. I don't know if you guys managed to catch league teams earlier tonight, but they were talking about the A grade and B graders and stuff in there. And David Parkin, interestingly, had David Mundy and Lachie Neale as B grade midfielders. I think he got shouted down pretty quickly by the rest of the panel, but it was certainly interesting to have a look at who he rated as the A and the B graders for each club.
The interesting one was on the couch on Monday night, Jonathan Brown salivating over the midfield battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be an awesome. I think. Do you think they're going to go Nat Fyfe and Josh Kennedy head to head, or do you think?
That would be pretty awesome to watch, wouldn't it?
Yeah, or do you think they'll try and use sort of one of their shutdown sort of players in there? I mean, the other interesting one will be who goes with Luke Parker. I mean, in the past, obviously Crowley's played a bit on Hanbury as well, and Hanbury's been in great form. So it'll be interesting to see how they use those matchups, and whether they keep moving them around until they get the matchup they want, or whether they just go head to head the whole way, or whether they use some negating midfielders as well. So it's definitely going to be a cracking contest in there, and more often than not, if you get enough ball in there, it's going to be whoever uses that ball inside 50 best, I think.
I'm keen to see how Sydney are going to try and compete in the ruck. I mean, they've got Mike Pike and Kurt Tippett really as the maybe. I don't think Sam Reid does much in the ruck, but going up against Sandilands and Clark, I think that's going to be an interesting battle.
Especially as Clark looks like he's improved on that final we faced against Sydney last year. He was even carrying an injury through that. Clark certainly stepped it up a notch. So that combination now, I think, I can't remember the stats we've had for hit out so far, but certainly Sandiland's been dominating a heap so far. So watch out, Mike Pike and Tippett, because they're going to be coming up against them. I even just noticed looking through the AFL preview and little clips, videos, and there's a little segment just with Mike Pike talking about coming up against Aaron Sandland. So he's a respected ruckman, and there's a lot of people that give Mike Pike a bit of praise, but if he's praising Aaron Sandlands and saying it's one of the biggest challenges for a ruckman, you just know how good Aaron Sandlands is.
Yeah, it'd be. I thought last week Mumford would have done a bit better job on Pike, but I thought Pike was pretty solid last week, and obviously Sandlands is the class above that, but just in terms of bulk, so it will certainly be an interesting matchup. And in the past, Sydney were one of those teams in particular when we just talked about a little bit before about the way that they would try, even if they got the tap, they would always try to go where Crowley was just to brew that sort of hit out. So it'd be interesting to see which way who Sydney go towards when they win a tap out and where Fremantle go. Obviously, the Fyfe to us is always our first option, and obviously Monday the second, and then you've got Neil as well. But it'd be interesting to see which way Sydney go to either negate Fremantle or to get that where they think they've got a perceived advantage in there. So it'll certainly be interesting. The other major thing as well will be the size of the ground. Obviously, Sydney play the congested area of their CG well, and they don't play over here very often. I think it's 8 out of the 29 times we've played are over here. So I know Lockie Reid on Channel 10 News tonight saying that Sydney have won 5 of the last 6 at Subi, but that 5 of those were against West Coast, so it really doesn't have a lot of validity, that statement. Obviously, we beat them last time over here in the preliminary final, so it'd be interesting to see how they go with that extra space particularly because I don't think a lot of their midfielders are sort of super quick guys, but obviously they've got beautiful hands in close, and their ability, I think, to sort of handball around in traffic is probably as good as anyone in the league, I think, even when you compare them to sort of Hawthorn and Sydney, Hawthorn and Freo, I think their ability to sort of handball in close within a 4 or 5 metre circles is probably as good as anyone going around.
Does anyone think that a player like Lance Franklin could be the difference and give Sydney a big advantage over us without Savani out there? Because every time he's been matched up, he's certainly kept him quiet, but this time it's the matchup sort of favours Sydney in terms of their combination of Franklin and Tippett, I think, over us. But if we can keep the ball out of the midfield, won't have to worry about it.
Well, that's what they've been talking about all week, is the midfield applying the squeeze to stop the flow going in there. But I don't think Buddy's really got off the chain against us too often, whether he's playing on Dawson, Johnson, McFarlane, the combination of those three rotating depending on where he is at the top, up the ground, down the ground, etc. I think the bigger issue is the third tall. Is it with Sam Reid? He hasn't obviously been playing too well. Is he going to be able to use his height advantage against an Ibbotson or a Duffield type player who's going to have to go and play him? Because normally you can get like a Johnson who'll be able to run off of him because you'll have Dawson and McFarlane playing Tippett and Franklin. I think that might be where the potential advantage is. I don't see. I mean, Franklin's Franklin. If he kicks three, he kicks three. So what? The other issue is going to be Jetta and Heaney. we're going to go there. You got Sutcliffe and then the other of Duffield or Ibbotson, who probably aren't going to be as quick to catch up with Jetta and Heaney. I think that's where their advantage in that forward line is, the speed of those two rather than their height.
And Heaney's only, 3 games into his career?
3 games in, he's a great player.
He's certainly shortening up as the
just give it to him
favourite
now.
for the
just give it to him now. Rising Star.
He's that good.
Yeah. The only one who I think in the Rising Star who could do something is Jesse Hogan if he still, if he can have a pretty solid year, particularly as a key forward. He might. I mean, as you said though, he wouldn't be wanting to be backing against Heaney at the moment. But
depending on how many games he gets, Nakia, what's his name, Nakia Cockatoo. Maybe him.
No, I don't think he's going to do enough.
No, agreed, but he's sort of that outside runner.
Yeah, there was,
but no, get him. I think that small pace of those forward line is going to be more issue than the Franklin Tipperary, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think Sutcliffe. I think Sutcliffe will be able to handle either one of those two players. I think they'll probably play Sutcliffe on Jetta because he's a little bit quicker, and Sutcliffe can hurt him the other way. I think whoever they play on Heaney,
will hopefully spur and just body him around a bit.
Yeah, or even I think or as you said, well, it depends on whether they consider him to be a threat or not aerially. Because whoever was on him, I think even if it's someone like Mzungu, they'll just try and peel off him as much as they can to give that extra support. The other thing as well that probably does get sort of left behind is that when McFarlane played on Buddy Franklin when he was at Hawthorn, he always played him exceptionally well. And if anyone remembers back to that final, he drove Buddy just about to to despair and just about lashed out. And I think
which is why I don't think that the tall players is more the issue. It's more those small running guys that are going to be the issue for us, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way they match up. And if we go the other way, even in their forward line, if you look at their back line, the Sydney back line, obviously you'd have to think that Richards will go to Pavlich. But then you've got obviously guys like, I think Nick Smith is a top player and he'll obviously take Walters. But then after that, it's going to be interesting because you've got Laidler, Reece Shaw and Rampy. Now, if we can get guys like Sandilands and Zach Clark down there, even Taberner, I think we can stretch them a bit down back there, particularly if we can get that quick ball movement in.
And then you got the likes of Fife, Barlow going down there who have got height. Mundy goes down there occasionally, just that extra. And again, another 6'2", 6'3" guy going in there for that height.
And those guys who play negating roles for them, such as Craig Bird and those type of players, even Lloyd's a bit of a negating type player. Those sort of guys will be they'll struggle to if we do rotate those guys forward like Fife. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how they go because they're not a hugely tall side, the Sydney midfield, and I think we can expose them if we rotate them correctly through that forward line.
I think our height is a definitely advantage up forward, and I think their smalls is the advantage for them. And then you obviously got your pretty even matchup through the midfield.
Yeah, because obviously the other two guys that are on their bench, as you talked about before, Balcom is with Ben McGlynn and Gary Rowan, and they're both quite quick and they love playing forward. And McGlynn's one of those players who can get under the radar a little bit, and as you said before, he's kicked 2 or 3 goals, so he'd be another one that they'd have to be looking pretty carefully at. Any other sort of matchups or anything else that stands out to you, Seppo?
Other than the fact that I must confess a bit of man love for Luke Parker, because I think he's probably one of the best Sydney Swans player out there in terms of just generally what he can do and turn the tide of a game or just rack up disposals and just basically do what Fife does for us. He's probably one of their better players out there, and if he starts to run hot, he can certainly push Sydney forward. And I just love to be able to get this win and just maintain our dominance, and people might sort of brush off our few wins, but if we can come out of this with a win against this sort of almost full-strength side, I'm not sure if Sydney are actually missing too many people, and if we compare our list from when we last played them over there in that final, I suppose we had a couple of guys injured and missing and just really starting to break down towards the end of the year. But now a lot of those players had bad games or were injured, are almost fit and firing. So we're probably in a better position. I'm not sure what Sydney are, but just as a general overall team sense, I think we're right into form. Yet Sydney probably haven't started this. Well, obviously, the same position as us with 3 wins, but it doesn't seem like they've come out with the same intensity of we've played with the opponents who obviously Essendon after that first start and GWS. And I can't remember their other game they've played, but Yeah, it's just a different kettle of fish, I think, the way that we've come into this side, and I just hope we can get a result here and just keep us on the top of that ladder and really just push not only for a top 4 but a top 2 spot, because it looks like it's going to be quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you think about, obviously there's been a lot of talk this week about how Lachie Neale fell to pick 58 for Fremantle, but when you think about Luke Parker fell to pick 40 in that 2010 draft, and, you look at some of those guys who got picked ahead of him, and, and he's probably, if you redid that draft now, he'd probably be arguably, if not one of the top, 2 or 3 players in that draft. I mean, and that was the one where Gold Coast had a lot of picks early on too, so... but he'd certainly be in that top 10 picks for sure. He's a terrific player, and he'll certainly be a mainstay of the Sydney midfield for years to come. And it'll be interesting to see who Fremantle go to head with. Someone like Mazungu would be a perfect matchup for him, or De Boer, because he's got that strength to be able to counter Luke Parker. But I don't know if necessarily they've got the nous around the ground. So it'll be certainly an interesting matchup in the way that they decide to sort of how they use Luke Parker and how Fremantle negate him, because he's certainly one of their driving forces. Who do you think? Jared McVeigh obviously is another key player for them, and he obviously quite often will play across the... I mean, you'd have to think Main would play on him if he plays across that half-back line, but he has been sort of moving a little bit forward and back lately, so who do you think will get the job on him, because he's obviously another key player for them?
Well, it's going to be that rotating between like Ibbotson, Duffield, Clancy Pearce or Lee Spur type that are going to go there, depending on where they are at certain times.
The other interesting thing, I think, and I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, guys, was the fact that Fremantle this year, in the mould of probably Hawthorn, have been a lot more... they talked about flexibility before the start of the season, but you're starting to really notice it. Like this year, we see they're rotating different guys through the middle of the square. Even though we've got our usual set there, like Pav comes in quite regularly now for, probably once or twice a quarter just to change things up a little bit. And they just rotate, even Clancy Pearce has been in there a few times, Subin's been in there a few times, and they're just rotating guys a lot more in through the middle there than they have in the past, where they were very rigid in the structure they played and who played where, and they didn't rotate from it very much. But now, this year, they seem to have gone a lot more sort of flexible in terms of who plays where across the ground.
I think that's just part of the evolving nature of what Ross has got Freo doing. I mean, they've been talking about it for a couple of seasons now that, players need to be multifaceted and able to play multiple positions. I mean, why do you think Maine was training with the defenders all pre-season, just getting different facets into their game? And that's starting to pay to, where you can run 9, 10, 11 guys through the centre bounce or through midfield rotations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I said, we'll see a bit more of the proof in the pudding this week, and I think Gerard Whateley probably put it best on AFL 360 tonight when he said, really we'll see who the number one contender at the moment is after this game, because really you'd have to think Hawthorn are being the reigning premiers and still up there, and Sydney and Freo, those two teams probably pushing for that, for that side to push against them. So it'll probably tell us a little bit about both teams this weekend with... Sydney haven't played, they've played GWS, and GWS hung in with them for a long time. Essendon were on top of them early for 3 quarters, and then they had a pretty good win in, round 2. But I think Fremantle, in sort of the teams they've played, have certainly been stronger against the teams they've played. So it'd be interesting to see how that form translates this week, particularly on the bigger expanses of Domain Stadium. Mm. All right, so what are our tips, boys? Who do we think will get up? Seppo, who do you think, mate?
Well, I'm going to go Freo, and I'm not going to stick with that theory I had before with 5 goals and just a 30-point win. I think I'm going to scale it back to roughly what they've put up on the preview. Most people are tipping us to win by about 15, 16 points, so I'll stick with that number, 16 points.
And Valkyrie, how about yourself?
As always, I will tip Freo. I get us by about that 2-goal mark, so 12, 13 points.
All right, I'm going to go a little bit higher only because it's the Len Hall game, and I think Freo will come out all guns blazing, and I think the ferocity of the game will, and I think there'll be certainly being a night game and everything like that, the crowd will be right into it, and I think Freo will get up by 26. So, and continue their unbeaten run to the year, but it certainly will be a I thought the Port, even though Port and Geelong games, I think this will probably be our biggest test because both teams match up really well. And Port obviously had guys like Lob out and that sort of stuff, or Lobie, however you say it. Go from there. Anything else you want to bring up, Seppo, before we finish this week, mate?
No, other than the fact that the Papa J has been putting great effort into the collating of votes this year already so far. So every game, just make sure you visit the thread he pops up and put your votes in for the players, because it's just great to see how we all view the players from each week on week and sort of build up our own little MVP at the end of the year. And for Sam FFC for organising the Tontine tipping competition. Great to see that running, and me and about 4 or 5 others already left after the quick exit of everyone this year. So it's always great comps to see on, so make sure you get involved in that across the board, and look out for any new ones that pop up over the year.
All right, thanks for that, Seppo. Excellent. And Malcolm, thanks again for joining us, mate. It's great to have you back on board.
Not a problem. Just sort of quick mention, Freo just announced the Starlight Purple Haze record-breaking donations for the round. $156,732.85.
That's a fantastic effort. Yeah, great numbers.
And a quick shout out to those guys. I know, being Kalgoorlie, my old town, shout out to those guys out in Kalgoorlie. I know they did a lot of fundraising out there this year as well with the.
Is that the Dowson family with their and co?
Yeah, doing the Starlight.
Dowson family in Goldfields community alone raised an incredible $60,000.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, big shout out.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a terrific effort by all those guys and the Dowson family in particular, because it's certainly going towards a great cause. So, let's hope the as I said, between that and the Anzac spirit this week, we end up getting on board. And thanks again for joining us, Seppo. Always great to have you on board, mate.
No worries. I'm looking for another win in the bank and sitting here next week discussing the same things.
Absolutely, and that's it for this week, and we will catch you next week. Bye for now.